They had everything: power, beauty, billions. But the one wish from their daughter turned into the curse that tore them apart. And when they finally looked back, it was already too late. Anita and Paul Okafor were living a dream most people could only imagine. They were young, attractive, and sat at the top of a billion-dollar business empire. From real estate to oil, their names opened doors. But beyond the business, what they loved most was their daughter, Elma. Elma was their miracle. After years of trying, she came when they had almost given up. She was 5 years old now, smart, lively, and always full of questions. Her laughter filled every room in their mansion. Her bedroom had walls painted in soft pink, with stars on the ceiling that glowed at night. She had everything a child could wish for. But what she asked for on her 5th birthday caught them off guard. It was during her birthday celebration, a grand event held in their home's private garden, filled with expensive decorations, entertainers, and guests from across the country. As the evening came to a close and the fireworks began to light up the sky, Elma turned to her parents and said softly, almost shyly, "Mummy, Daddy, I want a baby sister." Anita's smile faded just a little. Paul glanced at her, both understanding what that meant. They had tried. After Elma was born, they hoped for another child. But years passed with no success. Tests, treatments, and endless hospital visits had become part of their journey. But nothing worked. That night, after Elma went to bed, Anita sat alone in the living room, staring at a framed photo of Elma as a baby. Paul joined her silently, placing a gentle hand over hers. "She really wants a sibling," Anita whispered. Paul nodded. "Maybe it's time we try something else, something more certain." They both knew what he meant: IVF. It wasn't an easy decision. For a couple so used to controlling every part of their lives, putting their hopes in science was difficult, but they agreed. They would do whatever it took to give Elma the sister she wanted. The IVF process began quickly. The best doctors were hired. Anita followed every instruction, no matter how painful or exhausting. She took injections every day, changed her diet, and reduced her work schedule. Paul didn't miss a single appointment. He was her support system through it all. After weeks of waiting, the embryo was successfully fertilized and implanted. The doctors were hopeful. Anita tried not to get too excited. But deep down, she felt something good was coming. When the pregnancy was confirmed, it felt like a new beginning. Elma was the most excited. She would sit beside her mother every day, rubbing her tummy and talking to the baby. She told stories, made drawings of her and her baby sister, and helped pick baby clothes. But everything changed after the gender scan. "It's a boy," the doctor smiled. Anita and Paul smiled too. A healthy baby. What more could they ask for? But Elma's face fell. "But I asked for a sister," she said quietly. They tried to comfort her. "You'll love him," Anita said. "He'll be your best friend." Elma nodded, but her excitement dimmed. And though none of them knew it yet, that one wish, for a baby sister, was the moment everything began to shift in their perfect world. Elma didn't say much after hearing she was going to have a baby brother. She sat quietly in the car on the way home, her drawings and baby name lists tucked away in her school bag, forgotten. At home, she no longer rubbed her mother's belly like before. The excitement that once filled her voice was gone. Instead, she kept to herself, spending more time in her room. Anita noticed the change, but tried not to panic. She told herself it was normal, that Elma just needed time. But deep down, it hurt. Paul tried to lift the mood. He bought Elma a small gold necklace with her name and the word Big Sister engraved on the back. She smiled when she received it, but still avoided any talk about the baby. Meanwhile, the pregnancy became harder. Anita started feeling tired all the time. Some days, she couldn't get out of bed. Her blood pressure rose, and her doctor ordered her to take a break from work completely. Paul stepped in at home, managing meetings remotely and helping with everything he could. The housekeeper, Mama Binta, took charge of the house, preparing meals, handling the staff, and making sure Elma got to school on time. Life slowed down, but the silence between Anita and Elma grew louder. One evening, as Anita sat resting on the couch, Elma walked in with a book and sat on the floor beside her. "Will the baby stay in your room?" Elma asked quietly. Anita smiled. "Only for a while. Then we'll set up his nursery." Elma didn't respond. She just nodded and went back to reading. Moments like that happened more often. Short questions, soft answers, no real closeness. Still, Anita held on to hope. She believed once the baby was born, things would get better. Phil came a little earlier than expected. Anita went into labor late at night, and Paul rushed her to the hospital. After hours of labor, their son was born, healthy and full of life. They named him Phil. Paul held him in his arms with quiet pride. Anita was exhausted, but the moment she looked into Phil's eyes, she felt joy wash over her. Alma arrived the next morning. She walked into the hospital room slowly, holding a small teddy bear. She looked at her mother, then at the baby in the crib. "He's small," she said. "Yes," Anita replied softly, "but he's strong." Alma placed the teddy beside him, stood for a moment, then turned and left the room without another word. The days that followed were full of visitors, gifts, and congratulations. But Alma stayed distant. She played quietly, went to school, and said goodnight before bedtime, but never stayed too long around her brother. Phil, on the other hand, became the center of everything. Anita monitored his every breath. She fed him, bathed him, sang to him. She barely slept, always watching over him. Alma watched too, quietly from the side. Everyone praised Phil, but no one noticed the quiet sadness growing behind Alma's eyes, and no one asked how she felt anymore. Phil was a calm baby. He rarely cried, always smiled, and hit his milestones right on time. To everyone around, he seemed perfect. But a few months after his first birthday, Anita noticed something wasn't right. Phil was quieter than usual. He slept too long. His eyes looked tired. At first, the doctors thought it was just a virus. But Anita felt it, something deeper. She insisted on more tests, blood work, scans, second opinions. After days of waiting, they were called back for the results. The doctor sat them down, eyes heavy. "Your son has a rare genetic disorder," he said. "It affects his immune system. It's called Lambert 9. Most children with it don't survive beyond a few months after diagnosis." The room fell silent. Anita's breath caught in her chest. Paul sat still, trying to stay strong. Elma, sitting in the hallway with Mama Binta, had no idea that her world was about to change forever. Anita broke down that night. She held Phil so tightly it scared the nurses. Paul tried to console her, but she was unreachable. All she could think was, "I can't lose him." They flew Phil abroad, saw specialists in Europe and America. But every doctor said the same thing. There was no cure, just management. They returned home with heavy hearts and medical instructions. Phil needed weekly checkups, constant monitoring, and strong immune protection. He couldn't go to school, couldn't play outside, couldn't risk a single infection. And so, the mansion turned into a hospital. Anita became Phil's nurse, bodyguard, and full-time watcher. Every second revolved around his care. His meals, his breathing, his mood. She barely slept. She didn't leave the house unless it was for hospital visits. Alma watched it all. She would come home from school, eager to share her day, only to be waved off. "Later, Elma. Phil just finished his checkup." "Not now, sweetheart. I need to give your brother his meds." Soon, Alma stopped talking. She ate alone, did homework alone. Sometimes she'd find Paul in his study, and he'd listen. He tried his best to be there, but he was running a company and managing the crisis at home. He was stretched thin. Every time he brought up Elma's feelings, Anita would shut it down. "She's fine. She's strong. Phil needs me more." But Elma wasn't fine. She started writing in her diary every night. Short, painful lines. "Mom didn't look at me today. I hate that I asked for a sibling. Phil gets everything. I feel like nothing. At school, teachers noticed her change. She was still top of her class, but her smile was gone. She barely talked to anyone. At home, Phil got everything he wanted: toys, sweets, attention. Anita couldn't say no to him. She was terrified that one wrong moment might be the last. But to Elma, it felt like she was being punished for being healthy. The love that once wrapped her like a blanket had turned cold. And even though she lived in the same house, Elma felt completely alone. By the time Phil turned 3, he had already outlived the doctor's original prediction. He was still fragile, but stable. He laughed, played inside the house, and looked healthy to most people who saw him. But Anita refused to take chances. Every cough sent her into panic. Every sneeze was followed by a full day of monitoring. Phil became the center of everything. Anita wrapped her life around him completely. She no longer saw clients, no longer took phone calls unless it was from the hospital. She barely left the house. She was always near Phil, watching him nap, checking his temperature, wiping down every surface he touched. Paul tried to keep the house running as normally as possible, but it was impossible to ignore the change. He missed his wife, missed how they used to talk about business, about life, even about Elma. Now, every conversation was about Phil's next appointment, or new supplements to try. Elma had learned not to expect much. She no longer bothered asking for attention. She dressed herself for school, ate quietly, laughed politely when spoken to, and then returned to her room. Sometimes Paul would come into her room and sit beside her. "I know it's hard," he would say gently. "Mommy doesn't mean to forget you. She's just worried about Phil." Elma would nod, but she'd never say much. She had started to hide her emotions so well, even her father couldn't always read her. What hurt the most wasn't that Phil was sick. It was that he seemed to get the best of everything. While she wore her school uniform and carried her books, Phil stayed home and played with new toys. Anita bought him whatever he asked for. But when Elma asked for something, a trip to the amusement park, a simple family dinner out, her mother would say, "Not now, Elma. It's not safe for Phil." At school, Elma began to speak up less in class. She stopped raising her hand. Her teachers noticed her slipping into silence, but since her grades stayed high, they didn't push too much. Her loneliness grew heavier. She no longer looked forward to birthdays, holidays, or weekends. It all felt the same: quiet, distant, cold. The only person who still noticed her was Mama Binta. On quiet afternoons, she'd sit with Elma and help her plait her hair. "Your mother loves you," she would say gently. "She's just afraid, but don't carry that pain alone." Elma would smile a little, but deep down, she was already carrying more than she could handle. Sometimes she stayed awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if things would ever go back to how they were, wondering if her mother would ever look at her the same way she looked at Phil. It wasn't that she hated her brother. She just missed being seen, and no matter how much she tried to be patient, she couldn't ignore the growing ache inside her chest. An ache that whispered a cruel thought she never wanted to believe. Maybe they only have room to love one child. At 17, Elma had grown into a bright, thoughtful young woman. She didn't talk much at home, but in school she was a rising star. Her science project, a solar-powered incubator for rural clinics, had earned her national recognition. Out of hundreds of schools, she was chosen to represent hers at a televised innovation competition. It was the biggest moment of her life so far. Weeks before the event, she brought the invitation letter home and placed it gently on the dining table. "Mummy, Daddy," she said quietly, "please, I need you there, just this once." Paul looked up from his tablet, eyes softening. Anita barely glanced, focused on Phil's daily medication log. "When is it?" Paul asked. "Next Saturday, I'm performing in the first session, morning slot." She looked from one parent to the other, waiting. "We'll be there," Paul said, squeezing her hand. "Right, Anita?" Anita nodded briefly. "If Phil's okay, yes." Elma said nothing more. She had learned not to push. The morning of the event came. Elma dressed carefully. Her hair was neatly tied back, her outfit ironed the night before. Her team had rehearsed everything. She left early with the school driver, glancing once at the house, silently hoping they'd follow soon. Back inside, Anita was feeding Phil when he suddenly jerked and fell into a seizure. Panic set in. Paul rushed for the car, while Anita held Phil tightly, whispering his name. They called the hospital ahead and sped off without thinking twice. Elma's competition was forgotten. On stage, Elma stood in front of a large crowd and cameras. Her teammates were ready. Judges watched closely. She held the mic, trying to stay calm. She kept glancing toward the back of the hall. 2 seats, reserved for her parents, remained empty. Her voice trembled as she started her presentation. Slide after slide, she pushed through, masking the pain with practiced words. But inside, her heart was breaking. All she had wanted was to be seen, to be supported, just once. Halfway through the speech, her vision blurred. Her knees wobbled. Before anyone could react, she collapsed on stage. Gasps filled the hall. Teachers rushed to her. The ambulance arrived minutes later. Elma was rushed to the nearest hospital. Coincidentally, the same hospital where Phil was now admitted. Calls were made to Anita and Paul, but neither answered. Their phones were on silent. They were still sitting beside Phil's bed, unaware that their daughter was fighting for her life just 2 rooms away. It wasn't until one of Elma's teachers spotted them and ran toward them that the truth hit. "Mr. Okafor, your daughter is here, Elma. She fainted during the event." Paul froze. Anita's heart dropped. They ran through the hallway, splitting at the entrance to the emergency ward. When Anita reached Elma's door, the nurse stopped her. "She asked for her father only," she said gently. Paul went in alone, tears already building. Anita stood outside, hands trembling, heart pounding. "She doesn't want to see me?" she whispered. The nurse nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, Anita realized something. Phil wasn't the only one who had been sick. She had just never noticed. Inside the hospital room, Paul held Elma's hand tightly. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slow. Tubes ran into her arm, machines beeped steadily. He sat beside her, unable to stop the tears. "I'm sorry, my baby." "I'm so sorry," he whispered. Elma stirred faintly. Her eyes opened halfway. She looked at him, tired, weak, but still full of pain. "Did Mum come?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Paul hesitated. "She's outside. She wants to see you." Elma shook her head slowly. "No, please, not her." Paul didn't argue. He just held her hand tighter and kissed her forehead. Outside, Anita was pacing. Her chest was tight. Every nurse that passed, every beep she heard, made her flinch. She had always feared losing Phil. She had done everything to keep him safe. But now it was Elma slipping away, and she hadn't even seen it coming. She replayed all the times Elma had asked for her attention, every moment she brushed her off, all the birthdays she missed, all the mornings she barely looked up to say goodbye. Her knees gave way, and she sank onto a chair, tears rolling freely. Hours passed. Then, the sound no parent ever wants to hear. The emergency alarm. It came from down the hall. Anita and Paul ran toward Phil's room instinctively. But when they burst through the door, they found him sitting upright, tired but stable. "He's okay," the nurse said quickly. "The emergency isn't here." Paul froze. "Where then?" "Room C, Elma Okafor." Time stopped. They turned and sprinted back down the corridor. Doctors were already gathered around her bed. Nurses moved fast, speaking in low, urgent tones. Anita tried to enter, but was asked to wait outside. Paul stood frozen, eyes fixed on the door. After several long, painful minutes, the lead doctor came out. His face said it all. "We did everything we could." Anita's scream pierced the hallway. Paul leaned against the wall, chest heaving. The doctor's next words barely reached him. She had the same genetic condition as Phil, but a different silent type, undetected for years. Stress may have worsened it. There was no medication, because no one knew. Anita collapsed. The nurses rushed to lift her as she wept uncontrollably. She had spent years fearing death would come for her son, watching his every move, sacrificing everything to keep him alive. But death had come quietly for her daughter instead, the one she hadn't watched, the one she had thought would always be okay. Alma hadn't just died of a rare disorder, she had died unnoticed, unseen, unheard. That night, the Okafor mansion was completely silent. No lights, no music, just grief thick in the air. In Alma's room, her drawing still hung on the wall, old papers with faded crayon marks. A diary lay on her table, filled with words no one had ever read. I miss when I was enough. I don't hate Phil. I just wish I mattered too. If I die, will she notice then? Anita read every page. By the time she reached the end, she could barely breathe, and for the first time since Phil's diagnosis, she didn't feel strong anymore. She felt empty. The mansion felt colder than the hospital ever had. Alma's empty room stayed untouched. Teddy bear on the pillow, metal ribbons hanging crookedly, the diary now locked in Anita's trembling hands. For days, Anita barely spoke. She wandered the hallways in her nightdress, pausing at every photo of Alma she had once hurried past. When she did sleep, she woke gasping, hearing her daughter's voice calling, "Mom, look at me!" in dreams that shattered on daylight. Paul carried the weight of two griefs, the blunt edge of Alma's death and the slow erosion of his wife. He prepared funeral details, signed papers, met shareholders, all through a haze. At night, he sat beside Anita on the edge of their bed, but the silence between them grew wider than grief itself. Phil moved like a ghost. He set Alma's favorite cup at breakfast, knowing no one would drink from it. He placed her robotics trophy next to his medication box. One evening, he stood outside her bedroom door, little hand hovering over the handle, then walked away without opening it. On the 7th day, Anita gathered every medical file, every pill bottle, and sealed them in a box. She carried it to the garden, where Alma used to chase butterflies. There, under the old Iroko tree, she broke down. Paul found her kneeling on the grass, clutching the box. I watched one child so closely, I forgot the other was fading, she sobbed. What kind of mother does that? Paul knelt beside her. A terrified one. His voice cracked. But terror isn't love's enemy, silence is. The next morning, they announced the Alma Phil Foundation, pledging a slice of their fortune to fund early genetic screening in rural clinics, the very incubators Alma had designed. Reporters praised their generosity, but Anita heard only the question behind every compliment. Why now? At the memorial, classmates spoke of Alma's kindness, how she fixed a bully's broken project, how she tutored kids after class. Anita listened, knees shaking. Every story was proof that Alma was enough. She just hadn't been seen. When the service ended, Phil tugged Anita's sleeve. Mom, will Alma visit me in dreams? Anita knelt, tears blurring her son's face. She's already with you in here. She pressed his hand to his chest. Will she forgive us? Anita couldn't answer. All she could do was hold him as the sun dipped behind the church spire, painting the sky the same pink Alma loved. That night, Anita opened Alma's diary one last time. The final entry read, If I ever disappear, promise me you'll see the next child who feels invisible. Anita placed the diary on her desk and, for the first time since the funeral, opened her laptop. She began drafting a nationwide awareness campaign titled, See Every Child. Each keystroke felt like a stitch in a wound that would never fully close, but it was a start. The end. How many quiet children sit unheard while the world applauds another? If fear made Anita blind, what could she have done differently? And what would you do in her place? Can guilt ever be healed, or is it meant to guide us forward? Please share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next tale. Your voice could be the light that helps another child be seen. Thanks for watching.